welcome to this evening's digital conference, where we're going to be talking about discussing how tech can be used as a force for good during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also looking at some of the challenges facing the tech industry. Hello to all of you watching at home from your kitchens or from your living rooms. It's really, really great that you've been able to join us for this session, hosted by Epidemic Sound. My name's Maddie Savage, and I'll be moderating this panel discussion. I'm a British journalist based here in Stockholm. I've been living here since 2014, and most of the time my beat is work-life trends, tech and innovation. But right now I'm covering the coronavirus crisis here in Sweden for the BBC and other major broadcasters. So it's great to be able to bring these two topics together with a fantastic panel for you this evening. I'm going to get them all to give you a wave and say hello, and then we'll go to them each individually to have a bit more of an introduction. So first of all, hello, Oscar Höglund. He's the CEO of Epidemic Sound. We've also got Maria Hedengren from Readly. She's the CEO of that magazine app. And then we are also hearing from Diego Farias from the record label and distributor Amuse. And away from him as well. Excellent. Well, let's go round one by one then. So Oscar, just tell us a little bit more about you, Epidemic Sound, and why you've wanted to take part in this discussion this evening.
Well, first off, hey Maddie, and hey everyone listening. Just as you were saying, my name is Oscar. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Epidemic Sound. We're a music company based in Sweden, and we're basically trying to track the entire world. We do so by working with both storytellers and musicians and content creators alike. And it's been sort of quite self-evident and obvious ever since COVID-19 hit the world at full force that we feel an imperative of coming up with solutions, advice, sort of playing a role in terms of finding ways how we can cope with what's currently going on, and how we not only can help our customers, creators in general, but maybe society at large. And we thought that participating in this, where we sort of take first off a Swedish perspective and see what we can learn internationally, what we can help, and sort of how we can help to the current situation where we're in.
And already showing you're on top of innovation by trying out a new format for events online instead of in person. Maria, let's go to you next.
Yes, I'm the CEO of Readly. It's a Swedish-based app for magazine content. And we work with over 800 publishers today across 11 markets within and outside of Europe. And I mean, of course, we're all impacted by COVID and Corona, but not any less. The entire publishing industry has had a massive impact on that industry. And so it's very sort of close to my heart to come on board here and talk about how the tech industry can support what's going on out there. So I'm really grateful to be invited to join into this discussion tonight.
Thanks. And finally, Diego.
Hi, thanks, Maddie. And thanks, Oscar and the Epidemic team for putting this together. Great initiative. I had a conversation with Oscar a few weeks ago, I guess, and that was my introduction to this panel. And we both agreed that the creative space is, it's facing a challenge that perhaps it's never faced before. A lot of the young people who are in our target audience, just as in Epidemics and Readly's, are people who are affected in a way that they've never been affected before. So I wanted to participate in this and share some thoughts on that. Amuse is the company that I'm the CEO of. I'm also one of the co-founders of the company. We are effectively a music technology company. We do all sorts of stuff from music distribution to a record label. So music distribution is moving a song from a creator who's probably in their bedroom now onto services like Spotify and Apple Music, etc., etc. Yeah, super excited to be here and talk about a bunch of super important topics.
Well, thanks to all of you. I'll be bringing you in and out of the discussion, but also if any of the other panelists say something that piques your interest, do feel free to chip in as you would if we were if we were on a stage at an event. But before we move on to some specific questions about tech and innovation, I just want to set the scene a little bit as to what's going on here in Sweden, because I know not everybody watching is living here or perhaps following what's going on here. Sweden is taking an unusual strategy, one that has proved quite controversial from some international media coverage. Essentially what's going on here is that the crux of the government strategy is based on voluntary guidelines and recommendations. So the idea that the spread of the virus can be slowed down by individual actions in order to limit the strain on the healthcare service. So things like working from home, avoiding using public transport at peak times, avoiding all non-essential travel. And then there are also some laws here in Sweden as well. So gatherings of 50 people or more have been banned. There's also a ban on visiting people living in elderly care homes. And there is actually quite a lot of evidence to suggest that Swedes are on board with social distancing. Data shows that people are moving around less in city centres. Numbers of people using public transport is down. But there are continuing to be debates here about whether Sweden could have taken steps earlier in the process, perhaps saved lives, while others are suggesting that Sweden could be a good model for others to look at because it's argued that the effect of the coronavirus crisis might mitigate the impact on the economy and on society a little less. So those are some of the debates. We're not here to judge the scientists today or to talk about the ethics behind that policy, but I think it is important to have that context before we move on with the discussion. The death rate here is higher than other Nordic countries, but there are signs that the curve is flattening. So let's talk about some practical things then as we kick off. We're going to focus on adaptation and innovation. One thing that's really struck me here as a Brit living in Sweden but also observing what's happening elsewhere in the world is how easy the transition has been for a lot of Swedish companies to working from home and working remotely. Stockholm Business Region said that just within a week of recommendations coming in, they think that in big Swedish companies, 90% of employees were working from home. And a lot of that has to do with a culture of remote working and flexibility linked to family-friendly policies here in Sweden, strong connectivity. But I'd like to hear from all of you how that transition has been. Beyond the obvious Zoom calls, which everyone's doing, how has day-to-day business life changed? And we'll start with you, Oscar.
Okay, so I think that basically from my perspective, I would summarize it as in sort of three major things that we're both doing and seeing. I think one is we're on now week 7 in terms of working from home. And not all Swedes are necessarily sort of the introvert relish and love being sort of alone, as I think global media would have it. Some of us sort of think it's tough. And the things that we've put into place is, see, number one, in a world of social distancing, I think that digital test becomes crucial. So doubling down on work from home challenges, blending the serious with the not so serious, so making sure that there's a digital sense of community as we can't get that physically. That also includes investing even more heavily in communication than previously. So I think from a leadership perspective, committing to at least twice a week doing Ask Me Anythings, Q&As, and sort of over-indexing communication and information sharing much more than we have ever done before. I think it's the first. Second one, I would argue, is maybe connecting the digital and the physical. So trying to find a balance between that. And so examples, so we're offering like free access to yoga online classes where we tie the digital to the physical. Actually, after this, we're organizing a disco where we're all participating same place but in our own living rooms. Third one, connectivity, so home materials, of computers crashing, chairs in need of sort of people's backs breaking up, but acknowledging that there's a link between the physical and the digital. The third one maybe is, I'd say, reconnecting with customers, because I think that the first impulse was very internal. So how do we communicate with the people we work with, the musicians, the composers, but ultimately sort of seeing this as a chance to understand how to establish new lines of communication with our customers. So better cadence, more relevant info, just sort of upping our game in terms of making sure that we connect. So I would say that maybe those are the three ones that spring to mind, sort of top of my head.
Thanks, Oscar. Maria, anything radically different from your end?
No, I can't say that it's radically different. I'm into my 8th week now, and yeah, it's taking a toll on all of us, obviously, but we're also increasing the frequency of all hands Zoom meetings. We're kicking off every Monday with the getting into mind of working and seeing everybody, so we remember that we're one company and we're here for each other. So we try to increase the frequency of information flow, and I think Slack is like exploding. It's like coming smoke out of Slack. We communicate a lot through Slack and Zoom meetings, obviously, and we're also making sure that people take care of their health. So we have weekly health challenges, different competitions, and we're very fortunate to have a yoga instructor in the team. So she's doing online yoga some mornings, and doing walk and talks that we're out with walking like this, like an influencer, with our Zoom on our mobile phone when we're doing meetings. But it's like Oscar was saying also to stay very closely in touch with the publishers that we work with, the content creators. They're having, the publishing industry has is going through a really tough time, if it wasn't already before, because of the ad spend has just dropped dramatically. Print distribution, nobody's out and about them at the newsstand anymore, so it has a massive impact on them. So from day one, being constantly on the phone with our publishers and working out the different care packages of how can we support them even more today with data, with doing special content editions and coming up with all sorts of ideas tailored to help them in this moment.
Thank you. And Diego, how's it working with you and your team and your clients?
Well, I think both Oscar and Maria captured a lot of the activities that most companies should be thinking about, and I think one of the things that wasn't mentioned was the excellent Amuse music quiz that, of course, I manage, which should have been something important for the guys to mention. But no, other than that, I think one of the aspects that perhaps we don't talk so much about, because a lot of the focus is on operations and how to smooth the process of operations, is kind of the flip side of this is all of the people that work in our teams, and making sure that they are safe on a personal level. And I think I was having a conversation with someone just the other day, and they were comparing this to a major trauma in people's lives. And they were thinking about, do people need help from professionals? Could it be cognitive behavioral therapy, or could it be therapists of different forms? And I think that's a conversation that we haven't focused so much on, the mental well-being of our employees. And I think it's going to be more and more apparent that as much as we take care of kind of our operations and making sure that runs smoothly, we have to really look deep into our co-workers and colleagues' eyes and make sure that every day works for them, because we're making a lot of assumptions here. We're assuming that people can just flick on their computers at home. We've equipped them with all of this cool technology, so we know that they should theoretically be able to do it. But I employ people from a bunch of different countries, and some of them are very unaccustomed to being entirely alone whole days or several days in a row. And so there are all of these kind of more people-oriented aspects that will start to trickle into our operations if we don't take care of them and try to mitigate from day one. And I think that's one of the important things that our team is looking at right now, because operations for us, and we'll talk more about that, is absolutely exploding as a result of this. So all our teams are having to work as hard as they possibly can. But I think that there's a bigger conversation to be had about the mental or personal well-being of our employees and our team members and our clients and whoever it could be.
Definitely. And just picking up on that, that is one other aspect of the Swedish strategy where the Swedish Public Health Agency here has said that people's mental health and physical health is important. And that's one of the reasons they went against the idea of having a full-on lockdown, so that people could still at least go outside and get fresh air and work out or take meetings on the phone, as some of you have discussed. And also from my research as a journalist, access to online therapy is something that a lot of people are seeking out right now, and therapists are seeing a boom in demand for them at the moment. But looking more broadly at the industry, what about the wider opportunities? for tech companies to innovate and change your industries as a result of this? Is there a silver lining for different ways that we might work in the future? And I'll take Maria first this time.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I hope for society in general, but in particular for publishing, more and more publishers now are, I think we will see digitalization piece go up in a lot of areas, and publishing has been on the track to digitize over time. But I think this is where we can really help them even more to get more reach and provide their content online for everybody to access everywhere globally, regardless of whether they're out or at home. So I think that's a really big opportunity for the industry.
Yeah, people are at home, they're wanting to consume more content. But what about music? The music industry is changing beyond recognition right now. Nobody can go out to gigs right now. So what's going on there, Diego?
Well, I guess the part that you're touching on, which is the live music industry, is obviously hit incredibly hard by this. And there's a lot of innovation in that space right now, which is incredibly exciting. And I think speaks to a point that Maria mentions, which is, just an accelerated pace of digitizing all sorts of stuff. And in this case, the live music industry. As far as the part of the music industry where where Amuse operates in, we were actually fortunate to see Spotify's report come out just earlier today, and they are reporting a continued strong growth in users, which means that the ecosystem of Spotify, i.e. paying users, continue to stay very healthy, and that's what's driving kind of revenues in this space. What we're seeing as perhaps a silver lining of all of this is that, the creator space is exploding. Like everyone and their cousin and their three-legged dog are making music right now, and it's obviously something that's incredibly positive for the music industry. And I think what's happening to a large extent, which we are seeing, is that this is generating a lot of interest in the independent music market. Independent musicians around the world are now driving and creating more music than ever. We had a great piece in Rolling Stone last week talking about that, how the Swedish independent sector in particular is driving an incredible growth. And I think what's happening now is that everyone, the playing field looks very much the same for everyone. Everyone is stuck in front of their, in their couch or in their bed or at the kitchen table or whatever, and everyone is making music in the same way. So I think this is an incredibly exciting opportunity and exciting time for a lot of digital creators. Obviously, I look at it from Amuse eyes, but I think the same goes no matter what creative industry you look into, and that's incredibly positive for a lot of us, of course.
Oscar, do you want to pick up on that with your reflections, working with rights-free music?
Yes, I think that both Maria and Diego touched on a number of different things. A couple of things that stick out where I see change on a more macro scale is that I feel that COVID-19 is to some extent accelerating changes and trends that we're already seeing. So obviously working remotely is one of them. But to Diego's point, the whole concept of transparency and communication, we find ourselves in a situation where that's becoming more and more important, and the situation in that too. Digitalization, co-creation from afar is something that's quite customary, both if you're a storyteller or if you're a music creator as well, but accelerating that even further into a greater, bigger domain. So there's more general uptake of those trends. The second one is that I think that there's an element of democratization going on currently. We touched upon it in terms of a more level playing field, but if I use Zoom and the Meets and the Hangouts as an example, I think there's something like wonderfully democratic about them. Everyone has the same size, you have the same access to the floor. Previously it was more distinguished of who you knew, or in our case of reaching out to different offices, where were they in the world, the time to travel there were all these different factors. But if I struggle to see silver linings, if I do the acceleration of change that we already see, it's this democratization of people and skills where everyone has we're all in this equally shitty position, and that's a meritocracy in some way, in an interesting way, I find. The last one would be something along the lines of trying to use the momentum. We're in a situation where we have to be incredibly resourceful, and we're willing to test stuff, because it's, again, to previous speakers and to Maria as well, it's like a shock for the system. How we're willing to do these sort of crazy ideas, test the Hail Marys, do stuff which is totally out of the ordinary, because we're in non-ordinary times. And so maybe trace those three forces and sort of see the power in that and use it to our benefit, sort of in the difficult situation we're all in.
And there's also, I think, a lot of evidence that the public is receptive to that, receptive to new ideas, receptive to things changing. I mean, just look at big budget television shows where now the hosts are broadcasting from their living rooms, and news anchors are doing their own makeup, and everyone's sort of adapting their industries right now. I'd like to know if there are any other examples that you guys have picked up on from within your field or outside your field. Some of the other ones I've seen here in Stockholm, app codes for taxi rides for healthcare workers so that they can travel to work without using public transport, gift cards for your favourite hairdressers or restaurant that you can go to once the pandemic's over. I'd like to know what you guys have seen that's piqued your interest in terms of this innovation and thinking outside the box a bit.
So
I don't know who wants to go first. Diego's first. Good job.
Okay. So some of the things we've seen in the music space so far has been, different types of abilities to tip or directly pay the artists, which is something, of course, incredibly important when a lot of people's perhaps live revenues or other types of revenues have dried up as a result of COVID-19. So direct to artist or direct to creator type of solutions, I'm sure, are booming across a bunch of different fields. So I think that's probably one of the more interesting things that I've seen. There are bunch of other cool initiatives and more kind of one-off types of solutions. But I think this type of cutting out the middleman, going directly to the artist, I think that has been dramatically accelerated by this. And the question is if it would have happened this quickly had COVID-19 not happened. So I think that's probably one of the most interesting macro kind of changing trends that I've seen.
Maria? What have you spotted?
I guess I'm just amazed in general how companies and societies are coming together and how quickly everybody can adapt, and things that I think about maybe not within the tech industry, but how companies try to support the health industry, for example. And Swedish vodka, Absolute Vodka, is very well known. They immediately started to do hand sanitizer and those kind of things instead. And a lot of companies, they're doing they're readapting their business to try and support society to cope. That is very impressive to me. I think about that a lot. And I think in terms of what we're doing, we're seeing obviously the publishers, and we try to be innovative together with their data and see how can they reach new audiences. Can we translate their content into another language and distribute it, across other markets. So I think it's really opening up, outside of our own borders, and it's providing a lot of opportunities. And I think, like you said, Diego, maybe this will probably happen anyway, eventually, but I think it's just accelerating now.
Anything to add,
I think
Oscar?
that the only thing, I think, Maddie, the only thing that I would add to that is that I find it fascinating and encouraging that we're in this situation where basically there could be an argument made for society could go in one and two directions. There's so much stress to the system, sort of from a health perspective, financially, mentally. So society towards more unrest would not be unreasonable. However, we're seeing the exact opposite. I think we're seeing so many examples of communities, countries, basically the world coming together. I think about people going out on balconies, starting applauding, clapping. I look at my own housing, how people go either tech or non-tech, offer to help people who are risk groups do their grocery shopping, fix their lives, make sure they don't even have to leave their apartments. I look within our communities, musicians who start sort of co-creating tracks, passing the beat, where you sort of, I can't do this, I can't meet this person. They start sharing, so recording things together. I see storytellers use their own distribution for the benefit of others, to get messages out there, or to Diego's point, or to Maria's point, sort of add attention because you can't sort of make physical sales work anymore. So the whole concept of sort of seeing everyone coming together and offering up the different skills, the different traits they have, and putting it in some kind of a collective pot where people can draw value together. For me, that's not a given. It could have equally gone the other direction. And I can't speak to sort of how that's in other countries, but I can very much speak to, so in Sweden, I feel that there's a huge sense of community in us coming together and sort of helping out. And that's something wildly encouraging, I have to say.
Playing devil's advocate a little bit, I mean, there's Diego, you talked about how not everyone's used to being alone in their apartments working. Also, some people, I think, are finding the flow of information, the flow of technology quite overwhelming, spending a huge amount of time hanging out online and not having so much time to switch off. Are there any other downsides or challenges that you guys have reflected on? Is there a danger that some people are over-adapting and trying to come up with too many initiatives to adapt their business or keep their employees happy, when actually that's really just moving the pace of things at a rate that not everyone can keep up with?
Yeah, I mean, I think... Oh, sorry. I don't know if Maria, go ahead.
No, thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what we're doing, we have a system called Office Vibe. Some may be familiar with that. It's like frequent asking employees how they feel and different things. And and they can leave comment. And we have adapted and put in a lot of specific COVID-related, working from home-related questions. So I can see every day what employees are commenting on, and we can follow up on how they feel. And I can see that myself, the work and private life, and it's like all flows together, and the computer is always there, and I can always send another email. So we have to really watch out and encourage people to like shut down the computer and shut off Slack and like take their time off. And because we hear that from our employees, that it is a challenge. It's a blessing to be so switched on and hooked to all the technology, but we have to be really careful and support our teams, and it's okay to shut down the computer in the evening.
One quick response, from Diego, and then we're going to move on to talk a bit more about the economic challenges. Diego, what did you want to add here?
No, I think Maria covered it really, really well. I think there is some over-engineering going on, and I don't think it's out of malice or it's not. It's just perhaps guided by a wish to do everything as smoothly and as well as possible. And I think it can impact people in a negative way, and we just have to be alert and open to stuff like that.
Okay, let's talk a bit more about the economy now. As we mentioned earlier, it could potentially be one upside of Sweden keeping more of society open, pubs, restaurants, schools, businesses. That could be one upside when it comes to weathering the storm. But the Swedish government has been quite clear that they are expecting a strong impact on the economy. We've already seen a lot of redundancies, furloughs, even bankruptcies here. What are your reflections on the wider economic climate in which you guys as tech companies are operating at the moment? We'll start with you, Oscar.
So I think it's important to note that the three of us on this call, again, we're in a very privileged situation because our businesses are digital and they do have the opportunity to survive and continue doing well. Not everyone is in that position. Speaking from a very sort of humble stance, I find a lot of my thoughts go to the whole concept of internationalization and trade. And to your point, Sweden has always been an insignificant country with a weird language, sort of close to the North Pole, where the market isn't big enough to carry any of our sometimes large ideas. And so we've always had to rely heavily on being able to export. And I think that there's some kind of, at least for me, there's a level of, internationalization very much is at the heart we find ourselves today because of the free movement of people and goods. That's what's helped sort of COVID-19 spread and expel it and sort of accelerate the situation we're in. But adversely, I also think that sort of free trade and free movement and services is what's going to head out of this. I think that there may be, sort of, as we're all well aware, a point in time now where sort of international trade is sort of suffering and it's going to go down. I do think, however, though, that sort of that is going to be a huge part of the solution, understanding the different roles the different counterparts can play. And it's going to be in that intersection between finding these new balances of sort of how sort of trade is going to start to happen again. And I'm under no illusions that it's going to be exactly the same as it always has been. It's a bit unclear. One aspect might be sort of geographically, sort of, does this mean that trade is going to shift, in our case, more to like Asian markets who've rebounded sort of quicker as opposed to the US where they're more struggling? Is there going to be a change in terms of goods versus services? We being more on the services, which is digital, is that going to sort of, is the relationship between those two going to change? And then I think the third one, which is more maybe anthropological, is sort of how does the whole concept of nostalgia versus innovation play out? So I don't know how many people who have heard say longing so much to sort of meet people, have a beer, go back to my normal life. And there's power in that. And there might be a surge in going back to how things were because nostalgia at play. At the same time, I've had so many people say that, so, okay, this is innovation. It's never going to go back to as it is. Everything is going to change. It's going to be different. So, and I see that trade and change and internationalization got us here. It's always so it's going to be a part of getting us out of it as well.
And on more of a national scale, how do you guys, or does anyone have a strong view on the role that tech companies might be able to help some of those who are not in such a privileged position, so more offline-based businesses or people in the gig economy? Is there anything that the tech scene should be doing alongside the government? We do have a lot of very wealthy tech companies based particularly here in Stockholm. Does anyone have any reflections on who could chip in and how that might help?
I think something that you mentioned something about the gig economy, and I think what I really love, to see from the government is that we, together with the tech companies, continue to take care of. There are a lot of consultants, subcontractors in the Swedish tech scene who want to be their own, but they work for a lot of tech companies, and to make, and the Swedish sort of tech this is Sweden where unicorns are born, basically, so and all of them are reliant on a lot of gigists, so that governmental financial support when they create sort of requirements for who can get financial support from the government in this situation, that it's also that they don't look at it from a traditional employment perspective, but look at how does the subcontractors and how do companies that use a lot of subcontractor can also get the proper financial support to make sure that the Swedish sort of tech scene continue to thrive. Because I think the Swedish economy really relies a lot, and is we're very proud of our tech, this being the tech cradle for a lot of businesses. So I think that's where we should together with the government make sure that we support that part of our industry.
Yeah, and picking up on that, you mentioned a lot of people working in the tech scene are sole traders, self-employed, but that also goes for security guards, people working in providing food services, Uber drivers that take people to tech conferences. There's a lot of people working in the gig economy that have also been disproportionately affected, both economically and some financially, and some even when it comes to the spread of the virus from certain less well-off parts of Stockholm in particular. Just to say, we are getting a few questions in from those of you watching at home, which is fantastic. So we'll move to some of those in just a few moments, and then we'll be hoping to wrap this up within the next 10 minutes or so. So I think, does anyone else have any more reflections on best practices as we move forward? Oscar's raising his hand.
I could speak to best practices too, but sort of what I just wanted to chime in on in terms of what Marie was talking when we're talking about the economy and different how we can all chip in. My view is very much that we all as companies and individuals, we have different roles that we can play. So yes, there is one which is the breadwinner role, but I think that's it's important that people acknowledge that we need to bring different things to the table. Some might offer data, some might offer hope, some offer routine, some offer sort of comfort food. We're seeing like massive surges of sort of classical, inspiring, calming music. Some others offer motivation. I think we do ourselves a disservice if you can't offer money, you can't really contribute. I think that people are in desperate need of hope, inspiration, but also sort of tech companies such as ours. I think a level of sort of humility, because so we can show that we get it wrong all the time. We we make the wrong decisions. So being comfortable sharing what's working and what's not. So I think that has an important part in playing, sort of getting us out of the situation we're in now.
Okay,
if I can
I'm just going to pick
one
straight.
Final thing, Maddie.
Yes, go ahead, and then I've got a relevant question that's come in, so we'll actually move on to that. But go ahead, Diego.
Great. I was just going to say and I think Oscar spoke to this earlier, but I think there's a big role that everyone can take, which is in sharing correct information about what's going on. And I think in Sweden in particular, musicians were actually a part of informing key kind of risk groups about how to protect themselves in this situation. So a couple of Swedish rappers and younger independent artists who are from specifically affected communities like the Somali community or the Iraqi community in Sweden actually took it upon themselves to go out and inform elderly people in their families or nearby, and took an incredibly big responsibility that I'm sure they haven't been fully thanked for. So there's a responsibility on all of us to share correct information and be transparent and open. I mean, we've done a bunch of silly stuff around that too, like silly gifts, like stay at home, stuff like that are fun to share in your content. But I think they are a part of just a bigger message around being a part of this chain of correct information that allows people to take smart decisions about how to protect themselves rather than spreading all sorts of weird misinformation.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so some questions from the audience then. One is, how can traditional businesses who are suffering get in touch with Amuse, Readly and Epidemic Sound if they want to get support, or if they've got ideas for collaboration? It might be that we can share some information at the end of the chat. But does anyone have anything else to add on that one?
I mean, we're talking to people all the time from all sorts of walks of life. I'm not entirely sure how we can help everyone, but we'd be happy to engage in a conversation with anyone who has an idea about how we could work together in this space. So we've already spoken to people across a bunch of different industries to see if there's anything we can do together with them. But I think it has to be I can't promise that if a steel pipe supplier from the south of Sweden reaches out that we will be able to have a really cool partnership up and running next week. But I'll give it this. I think we can figure something out.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's an openness from the other panelists as well to just see what people have to say and have a listen. Another question is, when you're out working in the world, how are you and your team protecting yourselves? What steps, for those of you that are still occasionally having to leave home, what steps are you taking?
Maria, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, we're very fortunate. We're in a very completely digital product and a digital work environment, so we all work from home, no exception. And we don't travel at all anymore. So I mean, that is obviously it's up to each individual what they do outside of work, but for work they should not have to expose themselves to any situation. But that is very, I mean, I know there are a lot of businesses where you don't have that luxury. You actually have to go out to go to work. So we just feel very blessed that we can manage it that way. But we have been for 8 weeks now totally working from home, all of us, all the time, basically.
Any other quick reflections, or shall we move on?
No, I think
we'll move on because we've got a few more good. Yeah, we've got a few more good questions coming in. You've all been talking about the innovation that's been coming through right now, but Oscar, you also talked about nostalgia for how things used to be. And one question is, do you think that innovation will come to a halt when we get back to a situation that's closer to normal? In other words, I guess, how can we continue this momentum that's started?
Yeah, so I can take a crack at that question because I think it's a super relevant one and a pretty, because I think the answer could go two ways. If I look at myself for a second, I think that one thing that I've noticed with myself is that during the last sort of couple of weeks, I've become a really productive person. So much so that I get up in the morning room, hours at an end, I work constantly nonstop. And there's this sort of sense of work from home fatigue setting in. There's no time for resting. There's no time for very little reflection. So I'm basically a less interesting, more predictable and somewhat more boring version of myself, which I really don't like. So I think one sort of thing that could come out of this is the exact opposite. So once there is more sort of less monotony, more sort of different ways of sort of addressing things, I think that we could see a surge sort of from a creative perspective happening on one hand. And obviously the other stance would be, I think that in previous quarantines when people are alone, Spanish flu, I think there's a huge amount of music, books, text, pieces of literature which have been written in these quarantines. So I think that the jury's out whether sort of how this is going to play out. Creativity isn't going to stop, but it's going to find different forms. That's at least my 5 cents.
Do you think more people will be working from home? This is another question coming up. Will the working from home culture become stronger, even in places like Sweden, where it was already not really a taboo to ask to do that, or a couple of days a week? And some people are saying that they are scared of returning back to jam-packed cities and subways. And now we know how many jobs can completely be done from home. That sort of goes against employers pushing back in some parts of the world on saying it's possible. Anyone want a quick reflection on the trend?
Yeah, definitely. I think, we're jumping the gun a little bit here if we're assuming that, on a date, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months down the line, things are just going to go back to normal. I think one of the things that we've all touched on is, and you just did, Maddie, was it's possible for a lot of us to do this from home. So it forces us to completely rethink that the traditional workspace, which a lot of people might be longing back to in some weirdly directed nostalgia. So I think we have to think a little bit about that. And there's the flip side of that is, that you were also mentioning, that is, some people might be scared of coming back to regular life and bulldozing all those guys and being like, everyone has to be back in the office on May 15th because, the government said so, could also be something that could have a very negative impact on our work relations in the future, because everyone in Sweden, at least, people have been handling their isolation differently. Some have extended their isolation to include, near friends or family members or whatever it could be, and that could scare some people. And I've heard that during the calls that I make to the team members in the company, that some people express a little bit of concern about that. So I think we should be a little bit cautious about assuming that there's a normal to even go back to. And I don't mean to say that as, I'm not a tinfoil hat type of a dude, but I think there is a component here where perhaps we are assuming that there is a normal that can still be switched on. And
indeed,
we should worry about that when it comes to businesses too, telling businesses to just reopen when they've lost their jobs or whatnot.
We do need to begin wrapping things up. So I'm just going to end with Oscar off the back of Diego's reflections, which are, you know, some of the perhaps more challenging aspects. Can we end on a positive note of one hope or observation for something good, really good, that will come out of this crisis? No pressure.
Well, in that case, none felt. I'm going to revert back to where I was in that case, because I think that we may be. I think that we might find ourselves in hindsight looking at a kind of creative renaissance. I think that in historically, when we see sort of similar situations where there's been quarantine or there's been great needs or sort of huge social unrest and disruptions, these sort of imbalances, these changes, these levels of uncertainty sort of have historically given rise to a sort of a creative surge and a creative force which has been so powerful because it manifests hopes, feelings, despairs, all of the things we've spoken about, the uncertainty of what lies ahead. So we all on this call work in an industry where we get on and work with creativity and sort of very much trying to apply a silver lining thinking to all of this. That would be one of my sort of hopes. But to Diego's point, so we're seeing artistry sort of on a grassroots level like never before, going out into society, communicating their feelings in magazines, in books, in music and stuff like that. And we're now in a digital world where it can be appreciated by everyone and sort of consumed and sort of help to create a sense of us again.
I'm sure I speak for many of people watching this. I don't know where we would be without music, film, TV, books, magazines at the moment to keep us calm and help us escape from the reality outside our doors. Oscar, Maria, Diego, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to Epidemic Sound for trying this format, for allowing conferences to still go on during the COVID-19 pandemic. I know that we'll hopefully be able to share this video, so if you've missed the beginning or if you want to watch back any of the points, it will be available on YouTube. If you want to follow any of my work as I continue to cover the COVID-19 crisis as a journalist, you'll find me on Twitter. That's at Maddie Savage is my handle there, and of course all of the startups here are available and reachable there too. So stay well everyone, stay safe, and hopefully we'll meet again in the real world sometime. So bye from me, and bye from the panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks to the audience.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.